You're listening to The Conversation. It's 2008 and China is about to host the Summer Olympics in Beijing. This is a huge moment for the country, time to show itself off on the global stage. But a thick smog sits above the city. Air pollution in Beijing is notoriously bad, and the International Olympic Committee is worried. Time for emergency measures.
Chinese officials have taken action aimed at dissipating Beijing's air pollution before the Games after spending more than $15 billion on anti-pollution.
In the months ahead of the Games, the government imposes temporary traffic restrictions, allowing cars with odd license plates to drive on one day and those with even ones on the next. Factories are temporarily shut down and work on some construction sites paused. The measures work, and while the pollution is still bad on some days during the Olympics, it's a lot better than some had feared. Since then, as other cities in Asia like Delhi and Lahore struggle with dangerous levels of air pollution, China has dramatically cleaned up its air. The once smoggy skies above Beijing are much bluer, and the air quality index, once flashing red, is mainly in the safe zone. I'm Gemma Ware from The Conversation, an independent news and analysis platform partnering journalists with academics. Welcome to The Conversation Weekly, where experts explain how we ended up here. In this episode, how China managed to drastically clean up its air pollution, but why doing so actually had some unintended consequences for the climate. Laura Wilcox, you are a meteorologist and professor of aerosol climate interactions at the University of Reading in the UK, where you research air pollution and its impact on the climate. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So Laura, take me back. It's the early 2000s in Beijing. How bad is the air quality?
So some days the air quality is so poor at this time that you can't see houses on the other side of the street. In 2011, hundreds of flights are being cancelled into Beijing because the air quality is so bad that you can't see to land the planes, you can't see to get the safety vehicles out to meet the planes if there's an incident. But just imagine living in this kind of grey soup that tastes like pollution. You can taste the smoke in your throat, you can see it in your mouth and in your nose when you get home. And that's every day.
And what types of pollution are we talking about here, and where are they coming from?
So mostly we're talking about aerosols. So they can be small liquid droplets or particles in the air. And the main contributor to this is sulfur dioxide. So that comes from burning coal, and we see it also coming from vehicle emissions. It's terrible for our health. Poor air quality causes about 1 million premature deaths a year in China. And something we particularly worry about when we're thinking about air quality is something we call PM2.5. Now, these are particles that are less than 2.5 microns in diameter, so that's less than 1/10 of the width of a human hair. And these things are so small, they can cross the barrier in your lungs and actually end up in your blood. So in addition to causing the respiratory problems you might imagine you get with poor air quality, they're also causing heart disease and issues with people's brains and types of cancer.
When did China really begin to take its air pollution problem seriously?
So a lot of people put this down to China winning the Beijing Olympics.
It might be the most ruthless of all Olympic competitions, the race to host the Games. Today, Beijing won the 2008 Summer Olympics. It easily beat its closest rival, Toronto.
There was the beginnings of effort to really clean up Chinese air ahead of Beijing Olympics. But after that, we had a couple more incidents that were quite high profile. My favourite story is the crazy bad incident. This is something that happened in October 2010, where the US Embassy in Beijing is monitoring air quality, and it's tweeting every day what the air quality is in Beijing.
To get a blue sky day, the air quality index needs to be under 100. But it was at the opposite end of a scale Friday, so awful, in fact, that the US Embassy ran out of adjectives to describe it, at one point settling for crazy bad.
And we were actually seeing very high concentrations of the worst air pollutants on that day. And they were concentrations that the programmers on that Twitter feed never expected to happen. So they just put in their code, crazy bad. And there was a very quick retraction of that tweet, and it was replaced with a tweet that said beyond index.
Do you remember that happening?
I do.
What reaction did it get in your world?
It was an interesting one for us because we all put things like that in our code that you never expect people to see. So there's a little bit of, oh, that could have been me. But also it was a catalyst for action. So it was very awkward diplomatically for the US, and they apologised. But it also caused a real change in the approach in China. And China now has the most extensive air quality monitoring system in the world as a result of changes that were made following that day. That led to the Clean Air Action Plan being implemented in 2013. So we'd seen some emission control in the Chinese 5-year plans before that, but the Clean Air Action Plan implemented in 2013 was really where we started to see these big improvements in air quality.
Okay, so how did China start to do this cleanup of its air? What techniques was it deploying to get rid of the sulfur dioxide that was coming from the coal power plants?
So Clean Air Action Plans implemented in 2013 put restrictions on the emissions from these coal-fired power stations. Sulfur dioxide is the main target. So if you're a coal-fired power station, you have two choices. You can either burn less coal or you can stop the sulfur dioxide emissions being emitted. So one thing that we see in China and also worldwide is what we call scrubbers being fitted to chimneys. So sulfur dioxide is acidic and it reacts with alkaline things. And what we tend to do in scrubbers is inject limestone into the emissions from burning the coal, and the SO2 reacts with that to form gypsum. So you lose almost 95% of your SO2 from your chimney by implementing that.
And they actually work, do they? They're effective.
They do. They work very well. We use them in Europe as well, and they work quickly, right? So moving away from using coal as a source of energy is also really important. But that takes a longer time to implement. You need to change your infrastructure to do that. Whereas a scrubber, you can take your existing power station and just fit something into a chimney. So that's very quick to do.
What other measures did China implement to clean up its air?
They were also thinking about vehicle emissions. That's another major source of sulfur dioxide. So they really pushed for a transition to get older vehicles off the road. Those emit more than newer vehicles. And there was a push to use more electric vehicles. And that was incentivized by really improving the electric charging network in China. They also really dramatically improved their public transport systems in their major cities. And those are often electric as well.
What impact then did all these measures actually have in China? It is well known as a country that is still constructing coal-fired power plants. I think it's the country that's still putting more online every year than any other country.
China will increase coal production in a move that could threaten the country's climate change goals. China has been increasing use of nuclear and renewable power in recent years, but new coal-fired power plants are also planned.
So has it really had an impact that it's cleaning up sulfur dioxide emissions?
It's had a huge impact, and it's had it very quickly. So over East Asia, we've seen a 75% reduction in emissions of sulfur dioxide since 2013, and that's largely come from these Chinese efforts to improve their air quality. In the early 2000s, around 2010, 2013, before these policies really kicked in, Beijing was experiencing just 10 to 13 days of good blue sky days a year. And those are now up to about 300. So the improvement is huge. People are seeing the sky much more often than they were 10 years ago. Just last year, we were seeing around 30 micrograms of PM2.5 per cubic metre of air in Beijing, compared to the crazy bad incident where we saw 550, for example. But there are still some cities in China in severe pollution events that see numbers in the high hundreds, so 160, 180. So if we compare to cities of similar size, we're thinking about Delhi, Tokyo, New York. So air quality is also very poor in Delhi. So we see typically numbers in the annual mean of around 108 micrograms per metre cubes. Whereas in cities like New York or London or Tokyo, it's more like 7. So that's a big improvement for China, but there's still some room for improvement there.
And what about health benefits? Have there been any real demonstrable effects of that?
Oh, they're huge. We're seeing 1 million premature deaths a year, roughly, in China from poor air quality. We've reduced that number by 100,000 to 400,000 a year, depending on the estimates you read. So it's a huge benefit to human health.
That's a real tangible result of this one policy.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about air quality is we're talking about things that don't stay in the atmosphere for a long time. So if you decide that you want to fix this, you fix it really quickly and you see the benefits really quickly.
And do you think what China's managed to do in terms of its sulfur dioxide emissions is replicable in other parts of the world?
Yes, it's already happened in other parts of the world, in fact. It's something that we saw in Europe and we saw in North America in the 1980s. So we introduced clean air policies in the 1980s. So European emissions of SO2 in 1980 were up around 60 million tonnes a year, and we dropped those by a third in 20 years. So not quite as fast as China, but pretty similar. We have the technology to remove a lot of the emissions at source. So in terms of the speed of these changes, those definitely are replicable. What might not be reproducible is the magnitude of the change, just because there are no other countries that were emitting as much SO2 as China or as much as Europe was in the 1980s.
And I guess if you were sitting and thinking about this, you will have heard of Beijing's smog problem, and the fact that it's cleaned up its air, it might make you think, oh, wow, China's actually doing a better job at its greenhouse gas emissions. But that's perhaps a false picture to paint, isn't it?
A little. So these things are often co-emitted. Obviously, if we're burning coal, then we're creating greenhouse gases as well. So there's CO2 coming out of that chimney, and that's still happening. This policy was specifically targeting SO2 emissions and ozone emissions by fitting something onto a chimney to target that one species. So you're still getting greenhouse gases coming out of that chimney. That chimney is still there. So we still need to change how we're producing our goods. And obviously, a lot of the emissions of greenhouse gases from China are actually for things that China is producing for the rest of the world. So it's not necessarily individuals in China that are causing these emissions. It's the global system of how we manufacture our goods and produce our energy.
Coming up, how China's cleaner air provoked some unintended consequences for the climate by masking what was really going on with global heating.
Hi, I'm Anna Walker, host of a new podcast called Jane Austen's Paper Trail from The Conversation. From a scandal-filled bun shop in Bath to a windswept walk along the Cobb in Lyme Regis, and even a glittering Regency ball, we've travelled around England to bring Jane Austen's world to life through interviews with today's foremost Austen experts. Listen to Jane Austen's Paper Trail wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. Laura, we've been talking about the huge improvements that China made to its air quality in the last few decades. And while this is clearly great news for the health and well-being of people who live in cities like Beijing, your work has found some knock-on effects from this cleanup. Walk me through the science of what's been going on.
There are, and these would have been known to some degree when the policies were brought in. So atmospheric aerosol, which is largely driven by these SO2 emissions, cools the planet. So it acts to either scatter some of the radiation from the sun, or it modifies the properties of clouds so that they become more reflective and again scatter radiation from the sun. So you're reducing the amount of radiation reaching the surface, so it's a cooling effect. And if you improve your air quality, you take this cooling effect away, you see more of the warming effect of greenhouse gases. And that's what we think has happened here.
Earlier this year, you published a paper about the work you've been doing looking at the role that the reduction of air pollution in China and East Asia had on global warming. Can you explain what that research was doing?
We've worked with 8 modelling groups around the world, and we actually ran 160 simulations with 8 different climate models to look at the effect of a 75% reduction in sulfur dioxide over East Asia. And the reason we were thinking about this is because we've seen this policy change in 2013, we've seen this rapid reduction in air pollutant emissions, and in that time, we've also seen an acceleration in the rate of global warming. So if we look at a time series of global warming, we see that speeding up around 2010. We don't like it when global warming goes faster. So there's lots of people around the world trying to work out why that is. And we thought, crikey, there's been this huge reduction in SO2 emissions over China. So we've taken away this cooling effect. What does that do to warming? So we spent a few years running these simulations. It's really a very large number of simulations. And they showed that we get about 0.07 degrees of additional warming from this reduction in SO2 emissions over Asia. So that sounds like a really small number, but it's enough to explain the acceleration we've seen. So there's likely other factors at play here, changes in emissions from shipping. We've got a big volcano in there as well that contributed to warming, we think. But really, we think it's this East Asian change that's attributed to most of it.
And this is a global effect that you're seeing. It's not just happening over the skies of China.
It is a global effect. So all of those numbers are global numbers, but we see more warming close to where the emissions have changed. So when we look at our simulations, we see large warming over China, and we also see quite large warming over the Pacific.
Laura, the patterns that you and your colleagues have been monitoring and modelling, they suggest that cleaner air in China could actually lead to more global warming in some cases. And this really creates a dilemma, doesn't it? Because we want to clear up air pollution. It's vital to do so for human health. But then it seems to raise temperatures. So where do you sit on that spectrum?
I agree that it looks like a dilemma, but I don't think it actually is. So we know that poor air quality causes poor health, and we know that it's important to improve it really quickly. And what we're seeing here isn't new warming. What we're seeing here is a removing of cooling that's revealing warming that's already there. So the air pollution isn't the cause of the warming. It's just letting us see stuff that we've already done. Global warming is primarily caused by increases in greenhouse gas emissions. And greenhouse gas emissions and the aerosol that cause poor air quality are very different. So greenhouse gases stay in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. They cause warming for hundreds and thousands of years after they're emitted, whereas aerosol only stays in the atmosphere for around a week. So if we stop emitting it, in a week, it's gone. And that means that any effects we get from changing our aerosol are short-lived. So what we expect here is to see an acceleration in global warming as we reduce our SO2 emissions. So we reveal some of that additional warming from greenhouse gases. But then once the reductions in the aerosol slow down or stop, then we don't see that effect anymore. So all accelerations are bad. If we get warmer quicker, that's difficult to adapt to. So this is something that we as scientists need to understand and policymakers need to plan for. But the fact that it happens isn't reason to not do it.
And that's a really important point, isn't it? That you've got these aerosols, these sulfur dioxide particles in the air, which are perhaps almost an easy target. What's harder is finding global solutions to reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes, of course. And if you were a politician, you think you've got a choice. You can ask people to make big changes in their businesses and their lives to reduce greenhouse gases, and maybe you'll see the impact of doing that 50 years down the line. Or you can ask them to make changes that improve their air quality, and you're going to see health benefits from that within a few years. So you get all the benefits of your decisions and maybe your unpopular decisions within your term in office, whereas greenhouse gases is really a long-term problem. So it's more of a difficult challenge politically to implement that.
And does what you found in China help us predict in any way what might happen over the next few decades in other parts of the world?
We might see similar effects from different regions. So India is still having increases in SO2 emissions. They also have pretty poor air quality and will be looking to implement similar policies in the future. But the magnitude of the impact we might see from that will be smaller. China back in 2013 was emitting around 37 million tonnes of SO2 a year, compared to around 11 million tonnes that we see emitted by India at the moment. So the absolute magnitude of that change is smaller. So even if they have a really quick cleanup like we've seen in East Asia, the impact on global temperatures will be smaller.
One thing I've been thinking about as we've been talking, Laura, is what this all means for those who argue in favour of geoengineering.
Amid mounting evidence today that global temperatures are on the rise, some scientists have suggested cooling things down artificially through a process known as geoengineering.
One way of doing geoengineering is this technique called solar radiation management, which involves injecting small reflective particles into the atmosphere to block some of the sun's radiation. It's something we've done episodes about in the past on The Conversation Weekly, and it's controversial.
Earlier this week, 60 scientists published a letter calling for more research into solar radiation management, a very controversial process.
I wonder, obviously, what you've described has been happening over the skies of China is almost a case in point that this would work, that if you inject sulfur into the atmosphere, it would reduce the warming of the Earth. So how do you counteract people who use your own research to make a point that we just need to engineer our way out of global warming?
So yes, it's correct. If we inject a load of SO2 into the atmosphere, that will cool the Earth. So in that sense, it works. But geoengineering isn't that straightforward. In a lot of these scenarios, we continue to emit greenhouse gases, or we just emit them a little bit slower. The problem doesn't go away, we're just masking it. And that then causes physical problems, it causes ethical problems. So on the physical side, that cooling isn't manifested uniformly over the world. There are some regions that will warm more and warm less, so some will be cooled more or less by geoengineering. And the really important knock-on implication of that is that we see circulation changes, we see precipitation changes. So we're likely to see changes in the monsoon as a result of geoengineering because of these temperature gradients. We have this problem of what happens if we stop. And that, again, really builds on this property of aerosol. It's not in the atmosphere for a long time. If we stop geoengineering, if we stop our injection of SO2 into the atmosphere, then that cooling effect stops really quickly as well. So depending on how much greenhouse gas emissions we've used that to mask it, how much warming we've used that to hide, we could see very rapid warming of the world in just a decade or so after the termination of geoengineering. And that could be something that we chose to do on purpose, or it could be something that we can't plan for. We could be stopped in that program by war, for example. So it's very unpredictable, and we could be seeing a degree of additional warming happening in a decade.
Okay. Really interesting, and I think important to put that into perspective because there is so much hype around it as a fix-all solution.
You can see where the hype comes from, but geoengineering is often sold as an easy solution to this. It's something we can just do and we can carry on with our lives as normal. And that really isn't the case. You know, a lot of the technologies we would use for geoengineering don't exist yet. So it's not something where we can flick a switch and we can implement something as quickly as the Clean Air Action Plan.
Great. Thank you, Laura, for giving us all that context and in-depth knowledge about this. We really appreciate talking to you.
Oh, you're welcome. It was really fun to talk to you.
That's it for this week's episode of The Conversation Weekly. This episode was written and produced by Mend Marawani, Katie Flood, and me, Gemma Ware. Mixing was by Michelle Macklem, and our theme music is by Nita Saal. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us directly at podcast@theconversation.com. You can also sign up for The Conversation's free daily newsletter by clicking on the link in our show notes. The Conversation is a non-profit news outlet dedicated to sharing the work of academic experts with a wider audience. If you like what we do, please support us at donate.theconversation.com. And please rate and review the podcast wherever you follow us. It really does help us reach new people. Thanks for listening.
Every week, Michelle Grattan offers you a ringside seat to the latest in Australian politics with interviews and insights from political insiders. On The Conversation's Politics with Michelle Grattan podcast, we cut through the spin and get to the substance with independent analysis of the issues that really matter. Stay informed, search and follow Politics with Michelle Grattan wherever you get your podcasts.